The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the barren plains of Texas as Zachary Owens watched another dusty sunset from the weathered porch of his ranch house. Memories of a life once shared now haunting the empty spaces beside him. That bullet hadn't been meant for any living thing, just a warning shot to scatter the coyotes edging too close to his cattle, but the sound still made his hand tremble as he lowered his Colt revolver, the weight of it as heavy as the grief he'd carried for 3 long years. The year was 1878, and Sweetwater Creek, Texas, had seen its fair share of violence and heartbreak during the post-war decades. Zachary's story was just one among many, though few in town spoke of it anymore. At 32, he was neither young enough to start fresh nor old enough to fade away. He simply existed, running the small but profitable ranch his father had left him, speaking only when necessary to the ranch hands he employed or the merchants in town. The setting sun cast long shadows across the golden plains as Zachary tucked his revolver back into his holster and headed for the barn. His foreman, Henry Wilkins, had already rounded up the last of the cattle and was securing the gate to the north pasture. "Thought I heard a shot, Mr. Owens," Henry said, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. "Everything all right, just some coyotes getting too brave," Zachary replied, his voice rough from disuse. "They'll think twice before coming back." Henry nodded, knowing better than to push for conversation. "Heading into town tomorrow for supplies. Need anything special, ammunition, and coffee." Zachary paused, running a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at the temples. "And tell Mrs. Peterson I'll be bringing a steer for slaughter next week." "Will do." Henry hesitated. "There's talk in town about some new settlers coming through, widow woman with a young boy looking to set up at the old Miller place." Zachary merely grunted in response. New settlers meant nothing to him. Sweetwater Creek had seen its share of hopeful pioneers who couldn't hack the harsh realities of frontier life. Most moved on after a season or two. Heard she's from back east somewhere. "Husband died in the war, apparently," Henry continued, seemingly determined to spark some interest in his employer. "The war's been over 13 years, Henry," Zachary said flatly. "That's just it. Strange thing is, folks say she still acts like he's coming back someday." This caught Zachary's attention, though he tried not to show it. Grief does strange things to people. "Suppose you'd know better than most," Henry said, immediately regretting his words. "I'm sorry, Mr. Owens, I didn't mean get some rest, Henry." "Long day tomorrow," Zachary cut him off, turning toward his house without another word. Inside the modest ranch house, Zachary moved through his nightly routine with mechanical precision. He ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread left by Mrs. Rodriguez, the Mexican woman who came 3 times a week to cook and clean. The house was tidy but felt hollow, every corner holding memories of Caroline, her laugh, her touch, her final desperate gasps as childbirth took her and their unborn son 3 years ago. That night, as he had for 1,000 nights before, Zachary dreamed of Caroline. But this time, strangely, her face kept shifting, blurring into someone he didn't recognize, someone he hadn't met yet. The following day brought scorching heat, typical for late June in that part of Texas. Zachary spent the morning mending fences on the western boundary of his property, working alongside 2 of his ranch hands. Physical labor was his salvation, the only time his mind quieted enough to give him peace. By mid-afternoon, they'd finished the most urgent repairs, and Zachary decided to ride into town himself rather than waiting for Henry to return with supplies. The 4-mile ride to Sweetwater Creek offered little scenery beyond stretches of dry grassland punctuated by the occasional mesquite tree. The small frontier town consisted of a single main street with wooden buildings on either side, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, small hotel, and doctor's office making up the commercial heart of the community. A white clapboard church stood at the far end, its steeple the tallest structure for miles around. Zachary tied his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Copper, outside the general store and stepped inside. The familiar scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeted him as the bell above the door announced his arrival. Theodore Mills, the proprietor, looked up from behind the counter where he was helping a customer Zachary didn't recognize. "Be with you in just a moment, Mr. Owens," Mills called out. Zachary nodded and moved to examine a shelf of ammunition, trying not to notice the woman standing at the counter. She wore a simple blue dress, modest but well-made, and her light brown hair was pulled back in a sensible bun. What caught his attention, despite his efforts, was the boy beside her, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with his mother's features but a solemn expression no child that age should carry. "That should be everything on your list, Mrs. Taylor," Mills was saying. "Welcome to Sweetwater Creek. If there's anything else you need to get settled, you just let us know." "Thank you, Mr. Mills. You've been most helpful," the woman replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent that seemed out of place in Texas. "Come along, Timothy." As she turned, her eyes briefly met Zachary's. They were a startling shade of hazel that appeared almost golden in the afternoon light streaming through the storefront windows. For a fraction of a second, something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met before. She quickly looked away, gathering her purchases. "Mr. Owens," Mills greeted as the woman left the store. "What can I help you with today?" "Ammunition for my Winchester, coffee, and some tobacco," Zachary replied, approaching the counter. He hesitated before adding, "That was the new settler." Mills nodded, clearly pleased to share information. "Winifred Taylor and her boy Timothy just arrived yesterday from Virginia, taking over the old Miller place. Sheriff Daniels is helping her get settled." Zachary raised an eyebrow. "The Miller place is hardly fit for living. Been abandoned for years. She seems determined, brought some money with her, hiring Carson and his boys to fix up the house and barn." Mills leaned forward conspiratorially. "Strange story there. Her husband went missing at Gettysburg, body never found. 15 years, and she still believes he might come back someday." 15 years is a long time to hold on to hope," Zachary commented, surprised by his own interest. "That's what I thought. But the way she talks about him, Thomas was his name, it's like he just stepped out for the day. Keeps a candle burning in the window every night, according to what Sheriff Daniels told me." Zachary paid for his supplies, his mind unexpectedly occupied with thoughts of the widow and her impossible hope. He recognized something in her eyes that felt uncomfortably familiar, the same denial of reality he'd battled after Caroline's death. The difference was, he'd eventually accepted his loss, however painfully. This woman was still clinging to the past, to a ghost. As he stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, he spotted Mrs. Taylor and her son across the street, speaking with the town's physician, Dr. James Wilson. The boy was clutching his mother's skirts, looking warily at the unfamiliar surroundings. Something about the child's protective stance toward his mother stirred something in Zachary's chest, a feeling he quickly suppressed. He was about to mount copper when Sheriff Daniels approached, his silver star glinting in the sunlight. "Zachary," the lawman greeted him, using the familiar address that came from 20 years of acquaintance. "Good to see you in town for a change." "Sheriff," Zachary nodded, "just picking up supplies." "I see you've noticed our newest residents," Daniels said, following Zachary's gaze across the street. "The widow could use some neighborly help. That Miller place is going to take work to get livable." "I've got my hands full with my own ranch," Zachary replied. Sheriff Daniels gave him a measured look. "Your ranch runs just fine with Henry managing things, and you know it. Would it kill you to be sociable once in a while?" Zachary secured his purchases to his saddle. "It might," the sheriff sighed. "The ladies planning to raise chickens and grow vegetables to sell in town. Might be good for you to have a neighbor who's self-sufficient. The Miller place is 3 miles from my property line. Hardly neighbors," Zachary pointed out. "Closest thing you've got to one," Daniels countered. "Just think about offering some help. Carson's crew can only do so much with the building. She'll need advice about water predators, soil conditions." Zachary mounted his horse, looking down at the sheriff. "I'll think about it," he said, though they both knew he was merely being polite. He nudged Copper into motion, but not before casting one last glance at Winifred Taylor, who was now leading her son toward the hotel where they were staying until their new home was habitable. For the next week, Zachary did his best to push thoughts of the widow and her son from his mind. He focused on his cattle, on the approaching summer roundup, on anything but the strange feeling that had settled in his chest since their brief encounter. He might have succeeded if not for the summer thunderstorm that rolled in without warning one evening. The rain came down in sheets, turning the dusty ground to mud within minutes. Lightning split the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that spooked even the most seasoned horses in his stable. Zachary and his men worked quickly to secure loose equipment and check on the cattle. As he rode along the eastern fence line, lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. During one such flash, he spotted movement on the road that ran past his property, a wagon struggling against the mud, listing dangerously to one side. He recognized the small figure clutching the reins immediately. Without hesitation, Zachary urged Copper toward the road, reaching the wagon just as one wheel sank deeper into a muddy rut. "Mrs. Taylor," he called out over the sound of the rain. Winifred looked up, rain plastering her hair to her face. Her son huddled beside her, wrapped in what appeared to be her shawl. "The wheel is stuck," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady despite her obvious distress. "I thought we could make it to our property before the storm hit." Zachary dismounted, quickly assessing the situation. "You won't get this wagon moving tonight. My ranch house is just over that rise. You and your boy need to come with me." She hesitated, eyeing him with understandable wariness. After all, they hadn't been formally introduced, and he was essentially a stranger asking her to abandon her possessions. "I'm Zachary Owens," he said, realizing the oversight. "My ranch borders the Miller property." "Winifred Taylor," she replied, "and this is my son, Timothy." The boy peered out from under his mother's shawl, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "We can secure the wagon and come back for it tomorrow," Zachary explained. "Right now, you both need to get out of this storm." Another flash of lightning followed by a deafening crack of thunder made the decision for her. Timothy let out a small whimper, and Winifred's protective instincts clearly outweighed her caution. "All right, Mr. Owens," she agreed. Zachary helped her and the boy down from the wagon, securing what possessions he could with a tarp. He lifted Timothy onto Copper, then offered his hand to Winifred. "We'll have to ride together," he explained. "It's not far," she nodded, allowing him to help her mount. Zachary swung up behind her, acutely aware of this being the closest he'd been to a woman in years. Timothy sat in front, Winifred behind him, and Zachary at the rear, his arms reaching around both of them to hold the reins. It was an intimacy born of necessity, yet it sent an unexpected warmth through him despite the cold rain. The ride to the ranch house took only minutes, but by the time they arrived, all three were thoroughly soaked. Zachary called for Henry, who emerged from the bunkhouse, surprise evident on his face at the sight of the unexpected guests. "Get a fire going in the parlor," Zachary instructed as he helped Winifred and Timothy down from the horse. "And see if Mrs. Rodriguez left any stew we can warm up." Inside, Zachary quickly led them to the parlor where a fire was already beginning to crackle. "Wait here," he said. "I'll find some dry clothes." He returned moments later with one of his shirts and a pair of two small trousers he'd outgrown but kept for some reason, along with a blanket. "For the boy," he explained, handing them to Winifred. "I'm afraid I don't have anything suitable for you, but there's a blanket you can wrap yourself in while your dress dries." "Thank you, Mr. Owens," she said quietly. "Your kindness is unexpected but most appreciated." "I'll give you privacy to change," he said, feeling oddly self-conscious. "There's a screen in the corner you can use." While they changed, Zachary found dry clothes for himself and spoke briefly with Henry about preparing food and making up the guest bedroom and sofa for their visitors. When he returned to the parlor, he found Winifred sitting on the sofa with Timothy beside her. The boy was swimming in Zachary's old clothes, the sleeves rolled up several times, but he looked comfortable, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Are you hungry?" Zachary asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Very," Winifred admitted. "We haven't eaten since noon." "Henry's warming up some stew, should be ready shortly." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Zachary rarely entertained guests, and he'd certainly never had a woman and child in his home before. He wasn't sure what to say or do. "You have a lovely home, Mr. Owens," Winifred offered, seemingly sensing his discomfort. "Thank you, it was my parents'. I've maintained it as best I could." He hesitated before asking, "What brought you out in this weather?" "We were delivering our first load of belongings to the house," she explained. "Mr. Carson has made good progress on the repairs, and I was eager to begin settling in." She glanced at her son, whose eyes had drifted closed. "Perhaps too eager. I underestimated how quickly storms move across these plains." The weather here can be unpredictable, Zachary agreed, especially for someone from Virginia. She looked surprised. You know where I'm from, small town, he said by way of explanation. Word travels. Yes, I'm learning that, she said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It transformed her face, softening the worry lines that had been etched there moments before. Henry entered with a tray bearing 3 bowls of stew and a loaf of bread. Here you are, Mr. Owens, madam. Young sir. He nodded at each in turn. Timothy's eyes fluttered open at the smell of food. Thank you, he said, his voice small but clear, the first words Zachary had heard him speak. As they ate, Zachary found himself stealing glances at Winifred. The blanket was wrapped around her shoulders over her damp dress, her hair hanging in damp tendrils around her face. Despite the circumstances, she maintained a quiet dignity that he found himself admiring. May I ask what brought you all the way to Texas, Mrs. Taylor? He finally asked. Winifred set down her spoon, considering her answer. A fresh start, she said simply. Virginia holds too many memories. But not memories you're willing to leave behind entirely, he observed, thinking of what Mills had told him about her waiting for her husband. She met his eyes directly. Some memories are worth keeping, Mr. Owens. I'm sure you have a few of your own. The perceptiveness of her response caught him off guard. He glanced at the small portrait of Caroline that still hung on the wall, the one piece of her he couldn't bring himself to put away. I do, he admitted. Timothy yawned widely beside his mother, breaking the moment. You both must be exhausted, Zachary said, standing. I've had Henry prepare the guest room for you and your son. That's very kind, but we don't wish to impose, Winifred began. It's no imposition. The storm won't let up until morning, and your wagon is in no condition to travel tonight. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, we accept your hospitality. Zachary showed them to the guest room, a simple but comfortable space that hadn't been used in years. If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall. The washroom is through that door. You've been most generous, Mr. Owens, Winifred said, standing in the doorway with Timothy half asleep against her side. We're in your debt. No debt, he assured her. Just being neighborly, as Sheriff Daniels would say. For the first time, he saw a genuine smile cross her face. Nevertheless, I'm grateful. Good night, Mr. Owens. Good night, Mrs. Taylor. Good night, Timothy. The boy mumbled something that might have been good night before his mother guided him into the room and closed the door. Zachary stood in the hallway for a moment, struck by how quickly his quiet, solitary existence had been disrupted and how he didn't mind nearly as much as he would have expected. That night, he slept fitfully, dreaming not of Caroline but of hazel eyes and a quiet smile. He woke feeling more rested than he had in years, despite the interrupted sleep. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that he would need to help his guests retrieve their wagon. He found Winifred already in the kitchen, her dress mostly dried, helping Henry prepare breakfast. You didn't have to do that, Zachary said, pausing in the doorway. I'm accustomed to earning my keep, Mr. Owens, she replied, and your man Henry has been kind enough to teach me how to make proper frontier biscuits. Mrs. Taylor's a quick study, Henry said with more animation than Zachary had seen from him in months. Already better at it than me. Timothy sat at the kitchen table, looking more comfortable than he had the night before. He was examining a small wooden horse figure that Zachary recognized as one his father had carved for him decades ago. I found some old toys in a chest in the guest room, Henry explained, following Zachary's gaze. Thought the boy might like them. Of course, Zachary said. He approached Timothy. That was mine when I was about your age. My father made it. Timothy looked up, his solemn expression giving way to curiosity. Did your father teach you to ride too? He did, Zachary confirmed. Started me on a pony when I was 5 years old. I'm 7, Timothy volunteered. Mama says I might get a pony when we're settled. If we're settled, Winifred corrected gently, bringing a plate of biscuits to the table. We're still deciding if this is the right place for us. Where else would we go? Timothy asked with a child's directness. Pa knows to look for us here. We sent the letter. An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Zachary saw Winifred's face tighten slightly before she forced a smile. Eat your breakfast, Timothy. Mr. Owens is going to help us retrieve our wagon today. After breakfast, I'll have one of my men ride out to check on the wagon, Zachary said, accepting a cup of coffee from Henry. If it's as stuck as I suspect, we'll need to bring a team to pull it out. I hope our things aren't ruined, Winifred said, her concern evident. Most of what we own was in that wagon. We covered it well enough, Zachary assured her, and the rain has stopped. With luck, the road will be dry enough to travel by midday. They ate breakfast together, the conversation flowing more easily than Zachary would have expected. Timothy gradually warmed up, asking questions about the ranch and the horses. Even Winifred seemed to relax somewhat, though Zachary noticed how she skillfully redirected any conversation that veered toward her past or her husband. After breakfast, Zachary sent two of his hands to check on the wagon while he showed Winifred and Timothy around the immediate vicinity of the ranch house. The boy was particularly fascinated by the horses, and Zachary found himself promising to teach him to ride properly once they were settled. "You don't have to do that," Winifred said quietly while Timothy was distracted by a new foal in one of the stalls. "I don't mind," Zachary replied. "The boy needs to learn if he's going to live out here. Horses are a necessity, not a luxury. Still, you've already been more than kind." Zachary found himself wanting to extend that kindness further. "Mrs. Taylor, I've been thinking, the Miller place is going to need a lot of work before it's properly habitable. You and your son are welcome to stay here until the most essential repairs are complete." Surprise registered on her face. "That's very generous, but it's not charity," he assured her, having anticipated her objection. "I could use some help around the place. Mrs. Rodriguez only comes 3 times a week, and the cooking falls to Henry or me the rest of the time. If you're willing to take on some household duties, consider it an even exchange." She studied him for a moment as if trying to discern his true motives. Whatever she saw in his expression must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "A temporary arrangement," she clarified. "Just until Mr. Carson completes the basic repairs to make the house weatherproof and functional." "Of course," Zachary agreed, ignoring the strange disappointment he felt at the emphasis on temporary. Just then, his men returned with news that the wagon was indeed deeply stuck and would require a team to extract. Zachary decided to handle it personally, leaving Winifred and Timothy at the ranch house while he and 3 of his hands went to salvage the wagon and its contents. The recovery operation took most of the day. The wagon had sunk deep into the muddy road, and one wheel had been damaged. They managed to extract it and make temporary repairs sufficient to transport it back to the ranch, but it would need proper attention from the town blacksmith before it would be road-worthy again. When Zachary finally returned, covered in mud but with the wagon and its contents mostly intact, he found his house transformed. The usually tidy but utilitarian spaces had been thoroughly cleaned, with wildflowers placed in jars on tables and the scent of fresh bread filling the air. Winifred was in the kitchen, teaching Timothy to roll out dough for what appeared to be a pie. "You've been busy," Zachary observed, standing awkwardly in the doorway, suddenly conscious of the mud caking his boots and clothing. "I hope you don't mind," Winifred said, looking up. "I thought it was the least I could do, given your offer of accommodation." "I don't mind at all," he assured her, surprised by how much he meant it. The house hadn't felt this much like a home since Caroline was alive. "It looks nice." "Mr. Owens brought your wagon back, Timothy," he added, addressing the boy. "Most of your things are safe, though a bit damp." Timothy's face lit up. "Did my books survive, and Pa's medals?" "The trunk with the books seems fine," Zachary confirmed. "I didn't open it, but it was well sealed." Relief washed over Winifred's features. "Thank you, Mr. Owens. Those are our most precious possessions." She wiped her hands on her apron. "I've prepared a hot bath for you in the washroom. I thought you might need it after such work." The consideration caught him off guard. It had been years since anyone had anticipated his needs in such a way. "Thank you," he said simply. That evening, after he'd bathed and changed into clean clothes, they ate dinner together, a simple but delicious meal of rabbit stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Zachary couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal so much or conversation around his table. "Timothy, it's time for bed," Winifred announced after they'd finished eating. "Say good night to Mr. Owens." "Good night, Mr. Owens," the boy said dutifully. "Thank you for saving our wagon and our books." "You're welcome, Timothy," Zachary replied. "Sleep well." After Winifred had taken her son to the guest room, Zachary found himself sitting alone at the table, contemplating how quickly his solitary routine had been disrupted and how little he minded. There was something about Winifred Taylor's quiet strength and dignity that resonated with him. And the boy, with his solemn eyes and curious nature, had awakened something in Zachary that he'd thought died with his unborn son. Winifred returned to the kitchen a short while later. "He falls asleep quickly these days," she explained. "The journey has been exhausting for him." "It's a long way from Virginia," Zachary agreed, "especially for a child." She began clearing the table and Zachary stood to help her. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "Mrs. Taylor, I hope you don't mind my asking, but I'm curious about what brought you all the way to Texas. There must be more suitable places for a widow and child closer to your home." Winifred's hands stilled on the dishes she was washing. For a moment he thought she might refuse to answer. "It was Thomas's dream," she finally said. "My husband always talked about going west after the war, starting fresh where land was plentiful and a man could build something lasting." She resumed washing, her movements methodical. "After he disappeared at Gettysburg, I stayed in Virginia waiting, but as the years passed, I realized that if when he returns, he won't look for me there. He'll go west as he always planned." The conviction in her voice was unsettling. 15 years had passed since Gettysburg. Her husband was almost certainly dead, yet she spoke as if his return was inevitable. "So you're following his dream," Zachary said carefully. "I'm following him," she corrected, her voice soft but firm. "I sent letters to every regiment, every hospital, every prison camp. I've placed notices in newspapers across the country. Somewhere Thomas is looking for us, and now he'll know where to find us." Zachary didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to confront her with the harsh reality that no man missing for 15 years was coming back. Another part recognized the fragility of the hope she clung to and how easily it might shatter if challenged too directly. "Timothy believes this too?" he asked instead. Winifred sighed. "Timothy was born 5 months after his father left for war. He's never met Thomas, only knows him through stories and the few letters he sent before Gettysburg." She set the last plate aside. "But yes, he believes his father will find us someday. It gives him purpose, having a father to wait for instead of just a memory." "I understand holding on to hope," Zachary said carefully, "but 15 years is a long time, Mrs. Taylor." Her eyes met his, challenging. "How long did you hold on to hope after your wife died, Mr. Owens?" The directness of her question startled him. "Who told you about Caroline?" "No one had to tell me. I recognized the look in your eyes the moment I saw you in the general store. It's the same look I see in the mirror every day." She dried her hands on a towel. "I may be living on hope, Mr. Owens, but at least I'm living. Can you say the same?" Without waiting for his response, she bid him good night and retired to the guest room, leaving Zachary alone with her words echoing in his mind. He poured himself a small measure of whiskey and moved to the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Was she right? Had he stopped living when Caroline died? He'd maintained his ranch, conducted business, existed day to day, but that wasn't the same as living. There had been no joy, no connection, no purpose beyond survival. The irony wasn't lost on him. Winifred Taylor clung to an impossible hope that her husband might still be alive, while Zachary, faced with the certainty of Caroline's death, had chosen to stop living anyway. The next morning brought a tentative truce. Neither mentioned their conversation from the night before as they settled into what would become their routine over the next few weeks. Winifred took charge of the household, cooking meals and keeping the ranch house in order. Timothy divided his time between helping his mother, learning about the ranch from Zachary, and continuing his education with the books they'd brought from Virginia. Zachary found himself looking forward to returning from his day's work, knowing there would be a warm meal and conversation waiting. He began teaching Timothy to ride, starting with one of the gentler mares. The boy was a natural, quick to learn and fearless in the saddle. Zachary found himself wondering if this was how it would have felt to teach his own son. 3 times a week, Zachary would take Winifred into town to check on the progress at the Miller place and purchase supplies. Carson and his men were making steady progress on the repairs, but there was still much to be done before the house would be properly habitable. These trips into town did not go unnoticed by the residents of Sweetwater Creek. Zachary was well aware of the whispers and curious glances that followed them as they moved from the general store to the blacksmith to the doctor's office. Winifred seemed oblivious to the gossip, or perhaps she simply chose to ignore it. "People are talking," Sheriff Daniels commented one afternoon when he encountered Zachary outside the general store. Winifred was inside with Timothy, selecting fabric for curtains. "People always talk," Zachary replied, leaning against a hitching post. "True enough, but they're particularly interested in the widow staying at your ranch." The sheriff studied him. "Can't say I've ever seen you look this alive, Zach, not since Caroline." Zachary shifted uncomfortably. "It's a temporary arrangement, until her place is ready." "Sure it is," Daniels said with a knowing look. "Just be careful, that woman's heart is still tied to a ghost." "I'm well aware of her situation," Zachary assured him, perhaps more sharply than intended. "I'm sure you are. Just don't want to see you hurt again." Before Zachary could respond, Winifred emerged from the store with Timothy and several packages. She smiled at the sheriff. "Good afternoon, Sheriff Daniels. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is, Mrs. Taylor. How are you finding Sweetwater Creek so far?" "Everyone has been most welcoming," she replied. "And Mr. Owens's hospitality has been a blessing while we wait for our home to be ready." Daniels nodded. "Zach's a good man, one of the best in these parts despite his tendency to keep to himself." Winifred glanced at Zachary with a small smile. "Yes, I've noticed he prefers action to words, an admirable quality in a neighbor." Something in the way she said "neighbor" made Zachary wonder if she was reminding him of the boundaries between them, boundaries he hadn't consciously acknowledged, were beginning to blur in his own mind. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than usual. Timothy chattered about the new book Mr. Mills had ordered for him, but Winifred seemed lost in thought. Zachary found himself stealing glances at her profile as she gazed at the landscape passing by, wondering what she was thinking. That evening, after Timothy had gone to bed, Zachary found Winifred sitting on the porch, staring up at the stars. He hesitated in the doorway before joining her, offering a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a small nod of thanks. "Mr. Carson says the house should be ready in another 2 weeks," she said after a comfortable silence. "The roof is repaired and they've replaced the damaged floorboards. The well is working again, too." "That's good news," Zachary replied, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. "Though you're welcome to stay here as long as you need." She turned to look at him. "You've been very kind, Mr. Owens, kinder than I expected when we first met." "Zachary," he said suddenly, "after all this time you might as well use my given name." A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Zachary," she repeated, as if testing how it felt on her tongue. "Then you must call me Winifred." Another silence fell between them, this one charged with something neither seemed ready to name. "May I ask you something, Winifred?" Zachary finally said, his voice low. "Of course." "What will you do if Thomas doesn't come?" She didn't answer immediately, her gaze returning to the stars. "He will," she said, but there was something different in her tone, a hint of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "But if he doesn't," Zachary persisted gently, "what then?" "Then I'll raise my son and make a life for us here," she said simply. "I've learned to be self-sufficient these past 15 years. I can run a small farm, sell eggs and vegetables in town. Timothy will grow up, perhaps take over the property someday or find his own path. Alone." The word slipped out before he could stop it. Winifred's eyes met his, a challenge in them. "Is that so terrible? You've managed it." "Not very well," he admitted. "Not until recently." The implication hung in the air between them. Winifred looked away first, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "I made vows, Zachary," she said softly. "For better or worse, till death do us part. Without proof of Thomas's death, those vows still bind me." 15 years is a long time to be bound to a memory," he replied, echoing their earlier conversation. "And yet memories are powerful things." She set her cup aside and stood. "Thank you for the coffee. Good night, Zachary." He watched her go, the scent of her lavender soap lingering on the night air. For the first time in 3 years, Zachary found himself longing for something beyond the next sunrise and terrified by the implications of that longing. The following days brought a subtle shift in their interactions. There was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to confront directly. Zachary found excuses to return to the house during the day, and Winifred seemed to anticipate his arrivals, having coffee or a cool drink ready. Timothy, with a child's intuition, sensed the change. One evening, as Zachary was teaching him to play checkers, the boy suddenly asked, "Do you like my mama, Mr. Owens?" Zachary nearly knocked over the game board. "I respect your mother very much," he replied carefully. "That's not what I asked," Timothy said, moving his checker with deliberate precision. "I asked if you like her." "Why do you want to know?" Timothy shrugged. "She smiles more now. She didn't smile much in Virginia." Zachary considered his response carefully. "Your mother is a remarkable woman. Anyone would be fortunate to know her. Even though she's waiting for Pa." The directness of the question left Zachary momentarily speechless. "That's complicated, Timothy." "I know Pa might not come," the boy said, surprising Zachary with his candor. "Mama thinks I don't know, but I heard people talking in Virginia. They said Pa was probably dead." "What do you think?" Zachary asked, genuinely curious. Timothy moved another checker. "I think if he was alive, he'd have found us by now, but Mama needs to believe he's coming back." He looked up, his young face serious. "She needs something to hope for." The wisdom in the child's words was startling. "And you, what do you hope for?" "I hope Mama will be happy again," Timothy said simply. "King me." Zachary placed a second checker atop Timothy's piece that had reached his side of the board, his mind reeling from the conversation. He'd underestimated the boy's understanding of the situation and perhaps Winifred's as well. Was her continued devotion to her missing husband really about hope, or was it a shield against further loss? The question haunted him over the next few days as they continued their routine. Twice, he rode out to check on the progress at the Miller place himself, finding it nearly ready for habitation. The thought of Winifred and Timothy leaving his home created a hollow feeling in his chest that no amount of physical labor could dispel. On the Sunday morning marking their 4th week at the ranch, Zachary was surprised to find Winifred dressed in her best dress, a simple but elegant blue gown that brought out the golden flecks in her hazel eyes. "We're going to church," she announced over breakfast. "Timothy and I have missed the last few Sundays while getting settled, but I think it's important for us to become part of the community." Zachary hadn't attended church regularly since Caroline's funeral. "Of course," he said. "I'll have the wagon ready after breakfast. Will you join us?" She asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. He hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I think I will." The small white church was nearly full when they arrived. Heads turned as Zachary Owens, known for his solitary habits, entered with Winifred and Timothy. They found seats near the back, and Zachary was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. The service was familiar hymns he'd known since childhood, scripture readings that had once meant something to him, before grief had hollowed out his faith. What was unfamiliar was the feeling of sitting beside Winifred, hearing her clear voice joining in the hymns, sensing her quiet attention to the preacher's words. After the service, they were approached by several members of the congregation, including Theodore Mills and his wife, Dr. Wilson, and several women who seemed eager to welcome Winifred to the community. Zachary stood slightly apart, watching as she graciously accepted their introductions and inquiries. "She fits in well," Sheriff Daniels commented, appearing at Zachary's side. "Folks are taking to her." "She's easy to take to," Zachary replied, his eyes never leaving Winifred as she introduced Timothy to the preacher's wife. "Carson tells me her place will be ready by week's end," Daniels continued, studying Zachary's expression. "Suppose she'll be moving on then." "Suppose so," Zachary agreed, though the thought sent a pang through his chest. "Unless someone gives her a reason to stay," the sheriff added pointedly. Zachary finally turned to look at him. "She's still married, Tom, at least in her mind." "In her mind," Daniels repeated. "But the law has provisions for missing persons declared dead. After 7 years, most states will issue a declaration. She's more than doubled that time." "That's not for me to push," Zachary said firmly. "No, it's not," Daniels agreed. "But it might be something for her to consider if she had a future worth considering." Before Zachary could respond, Winifred rejoined them, Timothy at her side. "Sheriff Daniels," she greeted him with a smile. "Lovely service, wasn't it?" "Indeed it was, Mrs. Taylor. I was just telling Zachary here that your place should be ready by the end of the week." Yes, Mr. Carson told me the same, she confirmed, though Zachary thought he detected a note of hesitation in her voice. We're very grateful for all the work they've done. And for Mr. Owens's hospitality in the meantime, I'm sure, Daniels added with a meaningful glance at Zachary. Very much so, Winifred agreed, her eyes meeting Zachary's briefly before looking away. Timothy and I have imposed on him far too long. No imposition, Zachary said quickly. It's been pleasant having company. An awkward silence fell, broken by Timothy tugging at his mother's hand. Mama, Mrs. Mills invited me to play with her grandson this afternoon. Can I go? Winifred looked surprised but pleased. If Mr. Owens doesn't mind driving us back later. Not at all, Zachary assured her. I have some business in town I could attend to. Then yes, Timothy, you may go, but mind your manners and be ready to leave when Mr. Owens comes for you. The boy nodded eagerly before running off to join a slightly older boy waiting with Mrs. Mills. First friend he's made here, Winifred explained, watching him go. He had few companions in Virginia. The other children knew he was, different with his father gone and his mother believing what they considered impossible. Children can be cruel, Zachary agreed. As can adults, she added quietly. After parting ways with Sheriff Daniels, Zachary and Winifred walked slowly through town. Without Timothy's presence, a new awareness seemed to crackle between them. Zachary found himself searching for something to say that wouldn't reveal the tumult of emotions he was experiencing. Would you care for some lunch? He finally offered. The hotel dining room serves a decent meal on Sundays. Winifred hesitated before nodding. That would be nice, thank you. The hotel dining room was moderately busy, mostly with families enjoying a Sunday meal. The hotel proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, seated them at a small table near the window overlooking the main street. Zachary couldn't help noticing the curious glances directed their way. We're causing quite a stir, Winifred observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. Small towns thrive on gossip, Zachary replied, and I've been a solitary figure for so long that seeing me with a woman is probably the most exciting thing to happen in Sweetwater Creek this year. Is that what I am, a woman? She asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. Zachary met her gaze. You know you're more than that, Winifred. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Zachary, Mrs. Taylor, a voice interrupted. They looked up to see Theodore Mills approaching their table, his expression animated. I'm glad I found you. A letter arrived for you yesterday, but you haven't been to the store to collect your mail. He held out an envelope, which Winifred accepted with a murmured thank you. Zachary watched as she examined the return address, her face paling slightly. Is everything all right? He asked after Mills had left. It's from Virginia, she said quietly. From the War Department. Zachary felt a chill run through him. After 15 years, a letter from the War Department could mean only one thing. They had found something or someone. Do you want to read it now? He asked gently. She shook her head, tucking the letter into her reticule. Not here, later. The meal that followed was subdued, their earlier ease evaporating in the shadow of the unopened letter. Zachary could see that Winifred's thoughts were elsewhere, her responses to his attempts at conversation distracted and brief. By the time they collected Timothy and returned to the ranch, the tension between them was palpable. The boy sensed it immediately, looking between them with worried eyes. Why don't you go check on that foal you like so much? Zachary suggested, helping Timothy down from the wagon. I think Henry was planning to move her and her mother to the north pasture today. Once the boy was out of earshot, Zachary turned to Winifred. You should read it, he said quietly. Whatever it says, not knowing is worse. She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she withdrew the letter from her reticule. Will you stay with me while I read it? Of course, he assured her, leading her to the porch where two chairs stood side by side. Winifred sat, breaking the seal on the envelope with deliberate movements. Zachary watched her face as she unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read. Her expression remained composed, but he saw the slight widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible trembling of her lower lip. When she finished reading, she carefully refolded the letter and placed it in her lap. For a long moment she said nothing, staring out at the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. They found his remains, she finally said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the news. A farmer near Gettysburg was clearing a wooded area on his property and discovered several sets of remains. Thomas's identification tags were among them. Zachary reached out, hesitating briefly before covering her hand with his own. "I'm sorry, Winifred." She turned to look at him, her eyes dry but filled with a complex mix of emotions. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years I've been waiting for a man who was lying in unmarked ground the whole time. You couldn't have known, he said gently, couldn't I? A trace of bitterness crept into her voice. Everyone else seemed to, even Timothy suspected the truth. You held on to hope, Zachary said. There's no shame in that, isn't there? She asked, finally meeting his gaze directly. I built my entire life around a falsehood. I dragged my son across the country chasing a ghost. And for what? For a fresh start, Zachary reminded her, echoing her own words from weeks before. Isn't that what you told me brought you to Texas? A single tear slipped down her cheek, which she quickly brushed away. The letter says they're sending his remains to Virginia for proper burial. They want to know if I wish to claim them. Do you? She shook her head slowly. Virginia isn't our home anymore. Thomas isn't there, he's here. She touched her heart, and has been all along. She looked out at the Texas landscape, golden in the late afternoon light. Timothy likes it here. He's made friends, and I... She trailed off, but Zachary felt the unspoken words between them. He wanted to pull her into his arms to comfort her, but he knew she needed time to process this monumental shift in her reality. What will you tell Timothy? He asked instead. The truth, she said simply. He deserves that much, and I think in his heart he's been ready for it for some time. They sat in silence as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Zachary was acutely aware of their hands, still joined on the armrest between their chairs. It felt right in a way few things had since Caroline's death. That evening, Winifred spoke with Timothy alone. Zachary gave them privacy, busying himself in the barn until he saw the boy emerge from the house and head toward the small grove of trees beyond the corral. He watched as Timothy sat beneath an old oak, his small figure silhouetted against the twilight sky. Zachary approached slowly, giving the boy plenty of time to notice his coming. Mind if I join you? He asked when he was a few feet away. Timothy shrugged, which Zachary took as permission to sit beside him. Mama told you? Timothy asked after a moment. She did. They found Pa's body, the boy said, his voice small but steady. He's been dead the whole time, just like everyone said. I'm sorry, Timothy. The boy picked at the grass beside him. Mama cried. She thinks I didn't see, but I did. It's okay to cry when you're sad, Zachary said gently. I'm not sad, Timothy confessed, looking up with confusion in his young eyes. Is that bad, that I'm not sad about Pa? Zachary chose his words carefully. You never knew your father, Timothy. It's hard to mourn someone you've never met. What you're feeling is normal. I'm sad that Mama is sad, the boy continued, but I'm also relieved, Zachary suggested when Timothy struggled to find the word. The boy nodded. Is that terrible? Not at all. The not knowing was hard on all of you. Now you can both move forward. Timothy considered this. Does this mean we don't have to leave your ranch? The question caught Zachary off guard. That's something for your mother to decide. The Miller place is almost ready for you to move in. But I like it here, Timothy insisted, and Mama smiles more when you're around. He looked up at Zachary with earnest eyes. Couldn't we just stay? Zachary's heart swelled painfully in his chest. It's complicated, Timothy. Your mother needs time to sort through her feelings. But you want us to stay, don't you? The boy's perceptiveness was uncanny. Yes, Zachary admitted. I've grown quite fond of having you both here. Timothy nodded, satisfied with the answer. Then we will, he said with a child's certainty. Mama listens to what I want, and I want to stay here with you. Zachary couldn't help but smile at the boy's confidence. Let's give your mother some time, all right? This is a big change for her. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Winifred replied to the War Department letter, requesting that Thomas's remains be interred in the military cemetery at Gettysburg rather than returned to Virginia. She seemed both relieved and disoriented, as if the certainty she'd finally received had left her without direction. Zachary maintained a respectful distance, though every instinct urged him to comfort her, to tell her how he felt. He sensed she needed space to grieve not just her husband's confirmed death, but the end of the hope that had sustained her for so long. Carson sent word that the Miller place was ready for occupation, but Winifred made no move to leave the ranch. Neither did she mention staying. They existed in an unspoken holding pattern, their daily routine continuing as before, but with a new awareness between them. A week after the letter's arrival, Zachary returned from checking the western boundary to find Winifred sitting on the porch, staring out at the sunset. Timothy was nowhere to be seen. "The boy's with Henry," she said, answering his unspoken question. "Learning to milk a cow of all things." Zachary smiled as he settled into the chair beside her. "He's taking to ranch life like he was born to it." "Yes," she agreed. "He thrives here in a way he never did in Virginia." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sun sink lower on the horizon. Finally, Winifred spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "I've been thinking about what to do next." Zachary's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "And what have you decided?" "The Miller place is ready. Carson brought the keys yesterday." "I know," he said, trying to mask his disappointment. "It would be the sensible choice," she continued. "My own home, independence for Timothy and me." "You've always struck me as a sensible woman," Zachary observed, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. Winifred turned to look at him directly. "But I'm beginning to wonder if I've been sensible for far too long, Zachary. 15 years is a long time to live for a dream." Hope flickered in his chest. "And now I find myself wondering what it would be like to live for something real." Her eyes held his. "For someone real." Zachary reached for her hand, his heart pounding. "Winifred, wait," she said softly. "Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. I loved Thomas, part of me always will. He was my first love, Timothy's father, a good man who died serving his country. I won't pretend otherwise." "I wouldn't ask you to," Zachary assured her, "just as I'll always carry Caroline in my heart." She nodded. "But I've learned that the heart has more capacity than I imagined. These past weeks, being here with you, I've felt something awakening that I thought had died with Thomas, or perhaps something I never fully knew before." Zachary lifted her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "After Caroline died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. Then you arrived, stubborn and proud and so full of misplaced hope, and something inside me started to heal." "Misplaced hope," she repeated with a raised eyebrow, though there was a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Beautifully misplaced," he amended. "The kind of hope that brought you here to Sweetwater Creek, to me." Her free hand came up to touch his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with wondering tenderness. "I'm still not sure what happens next," she confessed. "This is all so unexpected." "We take it one day at a time," Zachary suggested. "No rush, no pressure, just two people learning to live again." "And Timothy already considers this place home," Zachary said, "and I've grown to care for him as if he were my own." "He adores you," Winifred confirmed. "He told me just yesterday that he wishes you were his pa." The admission sent a surge of emotion through Zachary's chest. "I'd be honored to be a father to him, Winifred, and more than that, I'd be honored to court you properly if you'll allow it." "Court me." A genuine smile spread across her face. "Zachary Owens, I've been living under your roof for over a month. I think we're well past the formal courting stage." "Nevertheless," he insisted, "you deserve to be courted. Flowers, dinner in town, the whole spectacle for the gossips to enjoy." She laughed then, a free and joyous sound he'd never heard from her before. "Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse?" As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in deepening shades of purple and gold, Zachary leaned forward, his intent clear. Winifred met him halfway, her lips soft and yielding against his. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative at first, but carried within it the promise of deeper passion to come. When they parted, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight, not just until the Miller place is ready. Stay here with me for good." "Yes," she replied simply, "we'll stay." The sound of running footsteps interrupted the moment as Timothy came barreling around the corner of the house, his face alight with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Owens." "Henry let me milk the cow all by myself," he exclaimed, then stopped short as he took in their closeness, their joined hands. A slow, knowing smile spread across his young face. "Does this mean we're staying at the ranch?" Winifred looked at Zachary, a question in her eyes that he answered with a nod. "Yes, Timothy," she confirmed, "if that's what you want." "It is." The boy's enthusiasm was unmistakable. "Can I have my own pony, and can I help with the cattle roundup? Henry says I'm old enough to learn." "We'll see about the pony," Winifred replied, a mother's caution tempering her son's excitement. "As for the roundup, that's for Mr. Owens to decide." "Zachary," he corrected gently. "I think it's time you called me Zachary, Timothy." The boy's eyes widened. "Does this mean you're going to marry my mama?" Winifred's cheeks flushed, but Zachary answered without hesitation. "If she'll have me, yes, someday when we're both ready." "Today," Timothy declared with a child's impatience. "You should marry today." They both laughed at his eagerness. "These things take time, Timothy," Winifred explained. "Zachary and I need to get to know each other better first." "But you already know each other," the boy protested. "You've been living here for ages." "He has a point," Zachary conceded, his eyes twinkling as he looked at Winifred. "We've already had more time together than many couples who decide to marry." "Zachary Owens, are you proposing to me with my son as your advocate?" Winifred asked, her tone mock serious though her eyes danced with happiness. "Not yet," he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips once more. "When I propose, you'll know it, but I will say this. I don't intend to wait years to make you my wife, Winifred Taylor." "Good," she replied softly. "I've waited long enough for happiness." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the three of them sat together on the porch, Timothy nestled between them, chattering about all the things he wanted to learn about ranch life. Zachary caught Winifred's gaze over the boy's head, seeing in her eyes the same sense of rightness, of homecoming, that he felt in his heart. For a man who had never thought to love again, and a woman who had spent 15 years praying for a husband who would never return, they had found in each other not just a second chance at love, but a first chance at the kind of deep, abiding partnership that neither had known before. By the time autumn painted the Texas landscape in hues of gold and amber, Winifred Taylor became Winifred Owens in a simple ceremony in the white clapboard church of Sweetwater Creek. Timothy stood proudly beside them, holding the rings and beaming with happiness. The entire town turned out for the occasion, their initial gossip having given way to genuine pleasure at seeing two people who had known such profound grief find joy together. Sheriff Daniels served as best man, winking at Zachary during the vows as if to say, "I told you so." Henry and Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, the former unusually well-dressed for the occasion, the latter dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. As Zachary and Winifred joined hands before the preacher, each felt the presence of those they had lost. Caroline, Thomas, not as shadows over their happiness, but as parts of the journey that had brought them to this moment. The past was honored, but it was the future that shone in their eyes as they spoke their vows. That evening, as they stood together on the porch of what was now their home, watching Timothy chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Zachary wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "Happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. Winifred leaned back against his chest, her hands covering his where they rested at her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "It feels almost wrong being this happy." "They would want this for us," Zachary said, understanding immediately what she meant. "Caroline would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed someone who could stand up to me," Winifred chuckled. "And Thomas would have approved of you. He valued honest, hardworking men above all else." "Then we honor them by living well," Zachary concluded. "By raising Timothy to be a good man, by building something lasting together. By loving each other," Winifred added, turning in his arms to face him. "Always," he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as the Texas stars shimmered overhead. Witnesses to a love neither had expected but both had found, against all odds, in the vast wilderness of the West. In the years that followed, the Owens ranch prospered. Timothy grew into a capable young man with his mother's determination and Zachary's quiet strength. 2 years after their wedding, Winifred gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Thomas Owens, honoring both those they had lost while celebrating their new beginning. 2 years after that, a son joined their family, completing the circle of love and healing that had begun on a stormy night when a stranded widow and her son found shelter with a lonely rancher. Sweetwater Creek grew and changed with the times, but some things remained constant, like the Owens family, whose story of finding love after devastating loss became something of a local legend, whispered to newcomers as evidence that even in the harsh reality of frontier life, second chances and happy endings were possible, if one had the courage to embrace them. And on quiet evenings, when Zachary and Winifred sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play under the vast Texas sky, they would sometimes share a look of wonder, still amazed by the journey that had brought them together, a journey of grief and hope, of letting go and holding on, of finding in each other the courage to live and love again.